Good evening, everyone. I'm Ron Vaughn. Welcome to our WFMZ TV viewers, our WFMZ.com viewers, and to viewers across Pennsylvania on the PCN network. It's my privilege to spend an hour with the candidates in the 15th Congressional District. The district encompasses the Lehigh Valley, plus parts of Berks and Montgomery counties. Let me get right to introducing the candidates. The candidates tonight are, first of all, Democrat John Callahan. He is currently the mayor of Bethlehem, first elected to that office in 2003. And secondly, the incumbent congressman, who is Republican Charlie Dent. He is seeking a fourth term in office. And thirdly, the independent candidate tonight is Jake Towne, who has left his job as a chemical engineer to run for Congress. Welcome to all of you. And here's the plan. Our tried and true WFMZ debate format is a little different. It's less formal, less structured than you may have seen in debates. In fact, what we're really trying to achieve is a discussion. No timed answers or timed rebuttals, things of that kind. The four of us will simply talk about the issues as you might around your kitchen table. I'll pose questions and change the topic from time to time, if I can. And the candidates are encouraged to interact, as we all naturally do, in discussions. The only formal part of the hour will be at the end, when each man will get 1 minute for a closing statement. We have drawn straws before the broadcast to determine the order of those closing statements and to determine who gets my first question. So, here we go. New York Times today, the lead on a story says this is not what a recovery is supposed to look like. Less than a month before the November elections, the United States is mired in a grim new normal that could last for years. So you could call it a recovery or a recession, I guess. But if you don't have work, and 95,000 jobs were lost just last month, the new normal stinks. The Times article says that at the current rate of job creation, then the country would need 9 years to recapture the jobs lost in the recession. And the real unemployment rate, so-called, which counts 11 million people who have stopped looking for work or who are working part-time because they have to, that's about 17%, or nearly 1 in 5 people. So, could you tell our viewers, first of all, Mr. Callahan, viewers who are without jobs, what kind of hope that they have of finding work if you are elected to Congress?
Well, Rob, I think that is the central question in this campaign, is jobs and the economy, and what are we going to do to move our country forward? And I think what we need to ask ourselves is, how do we get here in the first place? Congressman Dent has supported the failed economic policies that got us here. While the stimulus bill has helped to some degree to grow jobs, the Congressional Budget Office indicates that we've had up to 3.3 million jobs as a result of the stimulus bill. It's not enough. 9.6% unemployment is unacceptable. And so we focused a lot in this campaign on jobs. It's why I've pointed out a 5-point jobs plan and to do some of the similar things that we've done in Bethlehem. In the last 6 years in Bethlehem, we have driven more than $2 billion of economic investments that has resulted in more than 5,000 new jobs in the city. And so I've got a record on jobs plan, but elections are about the future, Rob. They're not about the past, which is why we've talked so much about jobs. And my jobs plan, I'm just address 3 points of the jobs plan, and it's a 5-point plan. Is first, we're going to close the loopholes on large corporations that are outsourcing jobs every day to foreign countries. Secondly, we're going to take the proceeds of closing those loopholes and we're going to invest them back into small businesses. I think we all recognize that 2/3 of the jobs in this country have been and will be created by small businesses. So we're going to lower that 9.6% unemployment. We're going to do it by investing into small businesses. And the third point of the plan is to make college more affordable, and not just a 4-year degree, but community colleges and trade schools, so that if they're unemployed, those that have lost their jobs right now due to the recession, they can go back and get the job training that they need to compete in the 21st century for jobs going forward.
All right, Congressman Dent, what would you do, what would you say to that person who's unemployed about why you could make a difference and offer some hope?
Well, first, just to respond to my opponent, John Callahan, I am the candidate in this race who was endorsed by the United States Chamber of Commerce and by the National Federation of Independent Business because of my strong record on supporting pro-growth, pro-job policies. You talked about the new normal with the New York Times article. Clearly, to me, this recession is not, the policies that have been enacted since the recession began by this administration and by the Pelosi Congress have not been suitable. The stimulus plan, it borrowed too much, spent too much, delivered too few jobs. Let's face it, it was really not so much about jobs. It was about a bailout to state governments. It really has not been effective. Just yesterday, I announced about how stimulus dollars are being misused, where our federal stimulus dollars are being sent to a terminal, a cement importation terminal in Staten Island, New York, for the express purpose of bringing in cement from Peru, manufactured in Peru. It'll undermine many jobs right here in the Lehigh Valley, which supports the New York market. My opponent supported that stimulus plan, which has failed. Unemployment has been over 9.5% for, I think, about 14 months now. I mean, that is just simply not acceptable. We can do better. We need to have a plan that will actually incent private sector investment. I say give a 20% deduction on income to every small business in America. Those small businesses will spend money much more effectively and efficiently than Washington will. This government-driven stimulus has proved to be a failure, and my opponent has endorsed it.
All right. Well, I'm sure we're going to bat some of the particulars around in just a second, but Jake Towne, let me get you in here, the independent candidate in the 15th District. You're talking to somebody, perhaps on the street, who has lost a job. Perhaps they've heard what the other two are saying about what they might do regarding jobs. What would you tell that person?
Well, absolutely, Rob. And the whole problem is that, you know, where I take a very different stance than both Mr. Dent and Mr. Callahan, is that governments don't create jobs. They do not create sustainable jobs. Only people do. And the whole thing is that to cure your unemployment, what Congress has to do, you really just have to look at one thing. They must stop from interfering with the regulatory laws, labor laws, and tax laws. All you need to do is ask yourself one question when you go through these laws and just say, you know, does this encourage or discourage employment? And if it discourages employment, you need to remove it. And that's what Congress, both the Republicans and the Democrats, have completely failed to do. Second of all, we need a lot less government federal spending and a lot more spending and savings by individuals. And what I support is a temporary federal income tax holiday to stimulate the economy. Because the whole thing is again, the whole problems that we have, the problems of excessive federal spending are not going to be cured by more excessive federal spending. And the whole thing is that the typical schemes that you'll hear these career politicians bat around, they usually result to one or two things. Either they want to just print up money and hand it out to people, or they want to resort to federal jobs programs such as the stimulus plan, which just never work. And the reason they don't work is you cannot centrally plan an economy with planners in Washington, D.C. It's very prone to corruption. It just won't work.
Let's talk about the stimulus. Congressman Dent says that the stimulus didn't work. You said it wasn't maybe good enough. What do you think?
What I will say is we have to remember again why the stimulus was necessary. You know, what I would say to that individual who's out of a job is one thing we shouldn't do is send the same people back to Congress that got us here in the first place. So the bottom line with the stimulus bill is that it was necessary to avert a recession from becoming a depression. Okay?
Hold on right there. Was the stimulus necessary, Mr. Dent?
Well, we needed to do something to incent job creation. This was the wrong plan. The plan that John Callahan supports, those who supported it said, you know, unemployment would not go over 8%. Dr. Christina Romer, the president's chief economic advisor, former economic advisor now, said it wouldn't go over 8%. But they were wrong in all their projections. They assumed that the federal government would drive us out of this recession. They were wrong. And then they doubled down. You know, you talked about the new norm with this health care law that my opponent, John Callahan, has endorsed. You're talking about a $2.6 trillion new program. We should be very clear about one other point with this law. I mean, you have employer mandates. The law is set up in such a way that you're going to see employers shrink payrolls in order to meet the mandate. I mean, so they're going to incentivize unemployment. It's simply wrong.
I want to come back to the details of the health care law in just a bit. But you were making the point.
That again, like the government intervention is not the answer. What Mr. Callahan backs is the current stimulus plan, which didn't work. What Mr. Dent supported was the Republican version of the stimulus plan, which was about $600 billion. That's the whole problem. Government intervention doesn't work. It's going to be individuals that get us out of this depression, not the government.
So there was no need for any of the federal spending under the rubric of stimulus in your estimation?
Absolutely not.
All right.
Let's talk a bit about the $850 billion Wall Street bailout that Charlie Dent supported. No strings attached. I did not. You're wrong, Charlie. You're not telling the truth.
You took three different positions.
You're not telling
you took three positions. Your campaign manager, Justin Shaw.
He doesn't speak for me.
Let's clarify what we're talking about. We've switched from the stimulus, which is federal money pumped into all kinds of parts of the USA, to ostensibly create jobs. And now you're switching to the bailout of the banks.
Right.
We just want to be clear what we're talking about.
Which unfortunately many people do get confused about. But Charlie Dent supported deregulation of Wall Street. Then he turned around and supported an $850 billion bailout of those same Wall Street banks. And then every opportunity that he's had since that bailout, taking millions of our dollars, bailing out the banks, allowing CEOs to collect millions of dollars of bonuses with our taxpayer dollars, every chance he's had to hold those same banks accountable and prevent another bailout, he has said no. So, we've got to remember, Rob, how we got here. The Wall Street meltdown created this recession and the loss of over 8 million jobs.
Congressman Dent.
Let's be very clear. He has taken 3 different positions on the Troubled Asset Relief Program. His campaign manager didn't. He just acknowledged his campaign manager doesn't speak for him. It's on the record, PA 2010. Nevertheless, one thing about the Troubled Asset Relief Program that we need to talk about is that Sarah Palin, John McCain, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, who's coming in for you next week, myself, and George Bush, we all agreed that we needed to do this. We all agreed that we needed to do this to stabilize the financial services infrastructure of the country. My opponent had no plan. In fact, as I said, he took 3 different positions on this. Now, we had an obligation to stabilize the situation. That money is being repaid, and we are collecting that money in short order. And when it comes to Wall Street, it is my opponent who interfered in a bond issue in the city of Bethlehem, costing over $1 million to the ratepayers because of his intervention on behalf of the Wall Street firm Merrill Lynch. Somebody might want to ask why he did that. Ron Donchez, your authority chair.
Let's talk about what they did with let's have you come back in just a second, Jake. That's a particular charge about the bond issue. If you want to come back at that real quick.
Say it's not true, and that we had an opportunity to increase the savings as a result. We actually saved taxpayer dollars because of the refinancing of that bond issue.
Sure.
The Merrill Lynch, right? We'll talk about Merrill Lynch. I'm glad Charlie brought up Merrill Lynch. They accepted billions of dollars of Wall Street TARP money in late October of 2008. And then a month and a half later, they doled out more than $3.4 billion of those same TARP dollars to CEOs and executives at Merrill Lynch. That is simply wrong. No one's going to tell me that we need to do that so they can give
TARP
the
law,
Wall Street executives billions of
the
dollars.
CEO pay situation had a lot of people upset.
Well, the TARP law, first he's made a number of incorrect statements. He's entitled to his opinions, but not his own facts. First, in the TARP law, to the TARP, do I get to speak, Rob? The TARP law that we're referring to, basically, it said, it gave the Secretary of Treasury the authority to regulate compensation, executive compensation, as well as severance packages for those institutions that were in the TARP. It's in the law. The failure has been on Secretary Tim Geithner, who has not done his job, who has not done what he had to do. Frankly, it's a difficult job. But that's where the failure was. So on the one hand, you say regulate CEO pay for TARP institutions. It was in the law that you now say you oppose, even though previously you said you had supported. And by the way, the chairman of your water authority, Ron Donchez, went to city council and complained about your intervention, and he said it would cost the city over $1 million because of what you had done.
We're not going to necessarily get to the bottom of the Bethlehem local issue.
Twice had an opportunity to curb those CEO bonuses, and every time he said no. Right. So it's easy to put it on Secretary Geithner, but at some point, it's your job, Charlie.
It is his job.
You are a member of Congress. You had an opportunity to vote to change it.
How much should we pay a bank teller?
Do it.
How much would you tell me how much should we pay a bank teller?
At some point, you have got to.
Jake Towne,
own your record, Charlie.
How much would you like to pay a bank teller?
The facts is, during the past 6 years, our country has gone into a depression. Mr. Dent was the congressman of our area in charge. He did not put forward any type of bill or any type of resolution to help us move it out. And my stance on the bailouts is very clear. Mr. Dent voted for the banker bailouts. Mr. Callahan maybe he's reversing his position, but he has on PA2010.com, you can go and look and see that he did actually support the bailouts. I am the only candidate in this race that opposes taxpayer-paid bailouts of private corporations. And what we need to also remember is that if the financial sector had crashed, what we would have had was a very brief and sharp recession in the financial sector, but we wouldn't have had all this spillover into the general economy, and all the joblessness that we're facing right now is really caused by that.
All right. The TARP program, maybe, I'm sure we'll come back to that. I want to talk also about tax cuts. I'm not sure we actually finished on stimulus, but we'll come back to that perhaps as well. The tax cut issue is something that the House was apparently going to try to deal with this time around, but has left Washington without dealing with it all. And that is, should there be an extension of the Bush-era tax cuts for everybody in America, no matter what they make, or just for folks who make less than $200,000? A couple of things on that to set this up. You have analysts who say, such as people from Deutsche Bank, that the recovery would be halted if Congress doesn't continue the tax cuts to everyone, even high wage earners. On the other hand, critics say it would take borrowing of $700 billion to pay for the tax cuts to the wealthier segment of America. Two stark contrasts. I'm not sure what the voters are to make of those kinds of things. In fact, by one poll, they're completely split. Some say only for those under 200,000, and about the other half of America says all the way around. What do you say, Mayor Callahan?
I am in favor of extending the tax cuts for 98% of Americans in this country. I do not believe that we should borrow more money from China to give millionaires and billionaires a tax cut that we can't afford. Charlie Dent has voted for an increase of $3 trillion in this country's debt, and a tripling of our federal deficit. Now, $700 billion, which is what those tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires will cost us, is yet another burden that we're going to pass on to our kids and to our grandkids. That $3 trillion in additional debt is $10,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. My record on reducing debt is in the 6 years that I've been mayor, we have $60 million less debt today than when I took office in 2004. So I am not in favor of increasing this country's deficit by $700 billion and passing that burden on to our kids and our grandkids to borrow that money and pass that on to our kids.
Well, let me switch things up. Jake Towne, a quick reply on the tax cuts. Everybody or just the folks who make under $200,000?
I'm for extending these tax cuts. However, what I would actually...
For all Americans.
For all Americans. But what I would do also is I think that certainly what a lot of people, when you look at the income tax, for instance, you could eliminate the federal income tax for 50% of the population of the United States and only lose 3% of that entire revenue. And it's a huge amount to those households. It's not a whole lot to the federal government. And if you want to be serious about, addressing these things and getting people back on their feet, because the whole thing is we should not be raising taxes during an economic depression. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong recipe for success. And even if we don't do that, we could do a temporary income tax holiday for several months. And that's the whole thing, is like the whole problem that we have is being caused by Congress. It's being caused by this excessive federal spending. That's what we need to get away from.
Charlie Dent?
Well, it's shameful that Congress adjourned. Speaker Pelosi adjourned the House without dealing with these 2001-2003 tax cuts. The issue is, do we want a massive tax increase come January 1? My opponent, John Callahan, has just said he does. And he's also redefined millionaire. If you make $200,000 or $250,000, you are now a millionaire, according to John Callahan. That's an interesting point. Nevertheless, what's going to happen is this tax increase will fall most heavily upon small businesses. Small businesses are organized as Subchapter S, partnerships, proprietorships. They pay the individual rates. Those rates will go up. Half of the income that's going to be subjected to this tax is coming out of small business. This is a huge... We can, on the one hand, ask small businesses to get us out from under this recession and create jobs. On the other hand, tell them we're going to raise their taxes. There is uncertainty driven by this failure to act. I mean, there will be tax hikes on savings, investment, income, married couples, families with children.
He did say, though, Congressman, that it's a very small sliver of the population that would be affected by the taxes going back.
But it is small business income that is largely going to be taxed. About half that revenue is certainly off the income taxes. My opponent is just that he's got a record of raising taxes.
All right. 97% of small businesses will not be impacted by this tax. The leader of his own party, John Boehner, admitted that. All right, let's talk about the 3% of the quote-unquote small businesses that will be impacted by not extending this tax. Remember, 98% of Americans get the tax cut. The wealthiest 2% would not. 97% of small businesses will have no impact as a result of that. 3% will. Let's talk about one of those businesses. PricewaterhouseCoopers grossed $26 billion last year, Rob. Does that need a definition of a small business by your standard or anybody's standard that's watching this program? I don't think so. Those are the type of small businesses that Charlie Dent's concerned about. Those are not the kind of small businesses that I'm worried about.
He couldn't be more wrong.
$700 billion was more debt on our kids to give Pricewaterhouse
even John Callahan has to admit that most small businesses are organized as partnerships, proprietorships, Subchapter S corporations. They pay the individual.
Will not be impacted regardless of how they're organized.
50% of the income will be, there's going to be taxes coming right out of small business. You know, he wants to punish small businesses. It is that simple. He talks about spending and debt. He mentions $3 trillion. What he doesn't tell you is the policies that he has supported. He's the candidate of these Washington policies. The health care law, $2.6 trillion program when fully implemented. The stimulus, you know, that's over $1 trillion, all borrowed. You've added $4.4 trillion in baseline spending.
I'm not a member of Congress.
But you supported all of them.
You have supported
should he become
for 6 years.
But you're
voted. You actually voted for a $3 trillion. You did a $3 trillion increase in our debt.
John,
are you denying that?
You're so fundamentally dishonest.
Are you denying that?
I am telling you that you've supported $4.4 trillion worth of new spending. But you not support the
Gentlemen?
When Congressman Dent went into Congress, the national debt was $7.6 trillion. It's now $13.5 trillion. It didn't get to be that way without a lot of spending occurring and a lot of yes votes by Mr. Dent for that spending. However, and again, we should not be raising taxes in an economic depression. Third, what we need to realize is the true national debt is not just the $13.5 trillion in the Treasury market. It's also all the unfunded liabilities into the future. When you look at the unfunded liabilities per the United States Treasury in our country, it's $107 trillion for the Social Security and Medicare. That's a little bit under $400,000 for every man, woman, and child. So let's have a frank discussion here. Let's get this all out here. I'm for balancing the budget. Not spending more than we bring in, period.
Well, we're 100 miles from that right now. Is there any way to get anywhere toward that?
Two budgets, the 2006 and 2007 budgets. And actually the budget deficits came down. For the two budgets I voted for. I voted against these budgets, which apparently my opponent supports, because since President Obama, his first budget he presented and I voted against, he will double the national debt in 5 years, and he will triple it in 10 years. And you've added $4.4 trillion, $4.4 trillion of new baseline spending added in 31 months since Speaker Pelosi took over. She's supporting you. She sent you a lot of money. She wants you to rubber stamp her agenda.
Rob, we all know. I mean, and the viewers know what's happened in this country with our debt and deficit in the last 6 years. It's about time that Charlie Dent, who's been in Congress under Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, Republican leadership of Congress, and Democratic leadership of Congress, begin to take a little ownership for the votes that he's made.
Can we talk about
this? Is
if you believe the poll, if you believe the polls,
talking about the problem.
Hold on, please. If you believe the polls, as voters reflect on what has been happening for a few years now, and they're asked about the mess and who's responsible, the polls would seem to indicate, I'm just nudging back a little bit, Mr. Callahan, that people are primed and ready in the month from now to send a message to Democrats to want to hold them responsible for the current state of affairs. President Obama, on the other hand, of course, says he inherited much of what we have. But what do you say to that?
The fact of the matter is,
I mean, Democrats are running up against it a bit. Right?
But this is a very anti-incumbent environment. Naturally, if the Democrats are in charge of Congress and Democrats are in charge of the White House and people are not happy where things are right now, you know, they're going to blame the party in charge. But we can't forget, Rob, who was there for the last 6 years and who supported the failed economic policies that led to the recession in the first place, that led to the need for an $850 billion bailout of Wall Street. That's the facts. And it's about time that Charlie Dent, who's been in Washington for 6 years, takes some ownership for the role that he's played in supporting those failed economic policies.
Ownership when we talk about budget deficits, let's talk about John Callahan in the city of Bethlehem. He's run deficits $8.5 million. His own auditors have said so. Don Cunningham, your friend, has said he has said you're operating in the red. Your city councilman David DeCinto has said it's a financial disaster.
This takes me into
you can't even balance your own budget.
This takes me into a direction of that I had hoped to go a little bit later, but I knew one thing would obviously dovetail with another. And one question might be, as we think about records, your record is as mayor of Bethlehem, and yours as a member of Congress for the past 6 years. The situation in Bethlehem is that germane. He's running a city, and he's running for Congress. So to nudge back in your direction just for a second, Congressman Dent, in what way is it germane that he may, arguably, one way, I don't know which, had difficulty with balancing the budget of Bethlehem. How is that germane to this?
First, his argument for his candidacy is that he says that he's been a good mayor, so that's the reason to vote for him. I'm saying he's not been a very good mayor. In fact, his budgets are a disaster. He's averaged spending increases of over 9% each year. I mean, those are the realities of, he promised that, he said in exchange for a casino, we'd have an immediate property tax cut in Bethlehem. It did not happen. You said it in 2005, John. I'll have to we'll be happy to furnish the public statement. We'll be happy to furnish the statement, but these are the promises you made. You promised a casino to the people of Bethlehem in exchange for a property tax cut. It has not happened, and it's not going to happen. You need to balance your budget.
My record as mayor is most certainly germane, and I'm very proud of it. All right, this is my record, both around jobs and in fiscal responsibility as mayor of the city of Bethlehem. $2 billion of economic investment, 5,000 new jobs in 6 years, $60 million less debt today than when I took office 6 years ago, $10 million slashing of government waste, and in the last 3 years, the violent crime rate in the city of Bethlehem has dropped by 25%. We are the safest city in Pennsylvania. I will put my fiscal record of lowering debt, balancing budgets, and cutting government waste up against Charlie Dent's fiscal record in Washington any day.
Clarify one thing. I have a few Facebook folks who are following along and who have asked a few questions, and it turns out one of them dovetails with this subject here, and that person has asked, what about my property tax reduction based on casino revenue? I don't know if she didn't identify herself as a Bethlehem.
There's been some confusion about property tax reduction as it relates to casino revenue. There has been a reduction in school property taxes as a result of the tax that the state puts on gaming, and folks have gotten that. In Pennsylvania or in Bethlehem, it averages about $170. Okay, that's for your school district taxes. The fact of the matter is, Rob, that the city of Bethlehem property taxes have not gone up in 4 years. It's the longest period of time in 30 years that property taxes in the city of Bethlehem have not gone up. That's a fact. Now, I have talked about how we're going to use the proceeds of gaming that come to Bethlehem as a result of the host fees, different from the tax for school district property tax reduction. Host fees that we have shared with Allentown to the tune of over $3 million, host fees that we have shared with Easton to the tune of $450,000. I, as the mayor of the city of Bethlehem, have helped Allentown and Easton as a result of that project in Bethlehem. I have been very clear about what I'm going to do with the proceeds of the gaming dollars. We're going to invest them back. We're going to stabilize the city's finances. We're going to deal with the impacts of gaming, which is what that fee is for in the city of Bethlehem. And ultimately, we are going to be able to reduce property taxes.
Mr. Dent, that does not satisfy you.
Well, no. He actually raised, he supported property.
It's what I've said since 2006.
He supported property taxes increases 4 years in a row, and even raised his pay in one of those years. But what he's also not telling you is the promise he made on the property tax reduction in exchange for hosting casino was made in 2005. You came up with your 4-point plan after the fact.
The host
also, John has talked about.
Allentown got $3 million.
Also, John has talked.
That's how you work with the region.
Campaign.
Go ahead.
Campaign. Well, the other things too. He also talked about crime. It's you should know that the Fraternal Order of Police has endorsed my candidacy. State FOP, Allentown, Lehampton, and I even believe the city of Bethlehem FOP has recommended me as well to the state FOP. So I am the candidate of law enforcement in this race. It may come as a shock to you. No, I can assure you that's why I have the strong support of our men and women in uniform.
All right, listen, Mr. Jake Towne, we've had you on the sideline for a second as we talked about the congressman's record and the mayor's record. That obviously leaves you out for just a moment, but do you care about any of this discussion?
Well, let's look at the record of not just not these two individuals, but let's look at the record of the Republican and Democratic parties. What our country really has is a two-headed one-party system that's completely failed the American people. I mean, the Republicans, who are supposed to be fiscal conservatives, they go into Congress and they, from under President Bush, and they increase the size of the federal spending by 70%. And then Democrats go in right in there and they just continue the same practices. Let's actually ask a question that has a whole lot of meaning going forward, which is the Federal Reserve, which is the money printing arm of Congress, is about to embark on what's known as quantitative easing, where they're going to buy $500 billion to $2 trillion worth of debt. What is your stance on these policies? Because these policies are going to impact the American people. It's going to lead to a crisis in the dollar, and people will be going out to try and buy things, and they won't be able to do it. Look at what they're doing to our seniors. They're not giving them a pull as well.
That's a question for these guys. Do you regard what he's just brought up as germane, speaking of the word germane?
Well, I'm not going to get into the monetary policy of the Fed.
You know what you're talking about.
You know what? You're asking the questions, Rob. Not Jake.
Well, we're also having a discussion. He wanted to know what you thought about
that. I am concerned about some of the Fed policies. Sure, I am. Who isn't? But I am very concerned about there might be some attempt at some point to monetize the debt. Which will mean inflation at some point.
Doing.
And I am well, we haven't experienced inflation yet, but sometime down the road, not in the near term, but we're very concerned about this. And so there are concerns about the Fed. Absolutely.
You want to take a swing at that, Mr. Callahan?
My record on debt and deficit's clear. I've talked about that. We have $60 million less debt today than when I took office back in 2004. That is John Callahan's record as mayor.
Just to be fair, he was raising a particular technical point about the Fed.
And I've talked about what we're going to do to get a handle on our debt and deficit in this country. It starts with no more bailouts. We can no longer have the taxpayers of this country on the hook for the failures and the excesses of Wall Street. We've got to institute pay-as-you-go principles and practices. You know, that seems like a novel concept in Washington, but here in the Lehigh Valley, it's just common sense. We've got to freeze government spending. Rob, there's a lot of people in the Lehigh Valley right now sitting around their kitchen table trying to figure out what they can and cannot afford. And I think it's time that Washington start having that same conversation.
One of my next questions. If you're to cut spending, and everybody's concerned about that, where do you cut? What specifically is cut?
That's a fantastic question, and I would say that the number one area that we cannot cut in is the whole Social Security and Medicare, because what we have is these people out there, they're not getting any COLA, they won't be getting a COLA, which is a raise in the Social Security in 2011, and I disagree with what the congressman said. I think those people that are living on Social Security see that their money isn't going any farther, and that's something that we need to take a look at. And the whole thing is that, you know...
Well, you said we're not to cut. Where could we cut?
Sure. Where we need to cut is really the military expenditures. What we have, our foreign policy abroad costs well over $1 trillion, which is about a third of the entire federal budget. What we need to take a look at is cutting, you know, the 55,000 troops in Germany, the 10,000 troops in Italy, because when you go look at those countries, what are they doing? They're cutting their defense budgets. They're cutting their defense budgets because we're stationed over there protecting their borders. And we also need to look at a very expensive and costly war on terror. I mean, the whole thing is with the war on terror is that the true national security threat that we have to our nation, the true threat to our way of life is the national debt. And that's what we need to address. We need to go after the terrorists that caused 9/11 with small military groups. What we're doing right now is not working. It's extremely costly. And when you go back in history and look at George Washington fighting against the British, what a lot of people don't realize today is George Washington lost just about every single battle. George Washington lost just about every single battle. But what's going on is... What they're doing is they're stretching out the supply chains, making us spend a whole lot of money. We're spending ourselves into oblivion. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires for a reason, and we need to get our troops home.
You're largely a call for defense, bringing the troops home. Respond, if you would, please, about defense spending cuts and then particularly anywhere else.
I wanted to amplify a point that Jake brought up in regard to COLAs, the cost of living increases for senior citizens. There's not a senior citizen in the Lehigh Valley that is not going to say that their cost of living was increased this year. And I'll tell you why. One very specific reason why, and that is the Lehigh Valley energy tax that has been hoisted on our senior citizens. In fact, anyone that flips on a light bulb in the Lehigh Valley is being subjected to a 30% rate increase for their electricity. A rate increase that Congressman Dent supported deregulation of the electricity companies back when he was in Harrisburg. So every single Lehigh Valley senior has been subjected to a cost of living increase, and they won't get reflected in the COLA for the country. But we all know that they're making decisions about whether they can.
Let's get a reply from Mr. Dent.
The question was on how are you going to cut spending,
right.
And you just went off. No, it was about the question was about spending.
My question was about spending.
The question was about spending.
Hang on. Let's come back to my question on spending in a second. After I've allowed Mr. Dent a quick rebuttal here to the charge that while as a state legislator you voted for deregulation, and that's what's raised our rates.
It's a fact.
Well, no, John. Again, let me tell you the facts here. John Callahan supports a $22 billion tax. I'm going to answer the question. Can I? A $22 billion tax on oil and natural gas production in the United States. You support it. You criticized me. You sent out a press release condemning me for voting against the CLEAR Act. You will tax domestically produced oil and natural gas at $22 billion. Now, let's talk about...
Tie that, please, to the 30% increase in electric rates.
Yes. I voted for electric competition and choice. Mayor Callahan supports it. He says electric competition and choice saved Bethlehem ratepayers $300-some thousand. Candidate Callahan, you sure did.
No, I did not.
Candidate Callahan.
If it cost me 30% more, how could it save me?
You said it publicly. It's your State of the City address.
We were able to buy mitigate your increase.
All right, hold on, please.
I didn't vote for an increase. I voted for competition.
The 30% increase. Please, okay, time out.
Has resulted in a 30% increase.
There has no doubt that there has been a 30% increase,
yes.
right? We can agree on that. His point is deregulation overall is a good thing, correct?
Under the old regulated system, your rates would be higher than they are today. That is a fact. Everybody understands that, John.
So those who are dealing as I am with higher electric bills, what you're saying, I'm just trying to cut to the chase, is that over time you'll end up having.
But how much your rate?
That over time they will end up having a better rate than they otherwise would have had there been no deregulation. Is that your point? Am I summarizing that well?
Without competition and choice, you would be paying higher rates today. You would be paying higher, absolutely. And there are very few people who disagree. The Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission says that.
All right, let's come back to my spending question, please.
But before deregulation, our rates were 30% lower than what they are now.
Let's talk about
that's a fact.
Hey, Rob, can I ask something? If we're going to talk about energy, why don't we talk about some national energy policy?
I would like to do that. But I don't think we ever finished the spending question, if you don't mind.
Mr. Callahan was asked a question on defense spending. If he actually reads his own literature, he's for a freeze in defense spending. But what we need to take a look at, and again, I'm for a large cut. Good.
Okay.
You read your own stuff. What we need to realize is our country spends more on military expenditures than the rest of the world combined. That's where we need to take a look at.
My question was about not just defense, but where can we cut spending?
Here's what, I've already talked about no more bailouts. I've already talked about pay as you go. Right? And the two other areas that I want to talk about is that we need to freeze spending, non-defense, non-entitlement spending. Right? There are folks every day in the Lehigh Valley right now trying to, with their incomes down, trying to figure out what they can and cannot afford. The federal government, we do it in Bethlehem. We've got to balance our budgets. It's about time that the federal government starts having that same conversation as well. And, necessity is the mother of invention, and I'm quite sure with less money, we'll figure out how to get by. And the fourth item of how to reduce debt to plan, how we're going to lower spending, is we're going to take a program that we borrowed from Air Products, continuous improvement. We take private sector principles and apply them to the public sector. We have used that program, continuous improvement, to reduce, to slash $10 million of wasteful government spending in the city of Bethlehem. If we can reduce $10 million of government spending in the city of Bethlehem, imagine what we can do with a similar program.
You're assuming that program that derives locally can be implemented can a single congressman implement that? That's what you'd like to do.
I've been trying to answer this question on how to cut
Charlie Dent on spending, please.
Look, you just heard John. He didn't give you any answers about how to cut spending. You heard absolutely nothing. He talked about PAYGO. The stimulus plan that he supported, more than $1 trillion when you had financing, that was not paid for. It was all borrowed. They waived PAYGO. They used this pay-as-you-go rule as a way to justify raising taxes permanently. Darn right, because you're trying to raise taxes through this PAYGO mechanism, and when you have big spending bills, you waive it. You waive it. Now, you also talk about some other interesting issues here on spending. I acknowledge I voted for the TARP, but you don't. But you also want to spend that money. You want to spend that money. He wanted to take TARP monies that were unobligated or repaid.
TARP being the
troubled asset,
Wall Street bailout.
You want to take that money and spend it for a second stimulus. Also, we should take those TARP dollars that have been repaid or have been unobligated and use that for deficit reduction. Take stimulus dollars that are unspent, cancel them. We cancel them. We should also, for every 2 employees who leave federal civilian service, replace them with 1. We should return to the pre-stimulus spending levels for non-security purposes, with some exceptions for veterans' health and some other things. But nevertheless, we're going to return to that level. That will save us lots of money. I'm talking about hundreds of billions of dollars worth of savings. You have heard nothing specific from John.
We're going to place
your specifics were freeze on non-defense, non-entitlement spending.
And taking a program, because the difference between...
Is a freeze the same as a cut? Is there a place to actually reduce spending?
No, it's not. And we have to remember that Congressman Dent, Mr. Dent, he's the one who's nearly doubled the size of our federal debt during the 6 years that he's been in office. I am the only candidate here that has pledged to balance the budget. Period.
I'm the only candidate here that's reduced debt.
And guess what? All the people out there, if you go out and ask them, they would say, as you all are saying, that in our cities and in our homes especially, we have to have a balanced budget. Well, they want to know, is that ever, just a second,
6 years,
they want to know, is that ever a possibility at the federal level, or are we just whistling in the wind here? Is balancing the federal budget, in other words. One of the congressional candidates who was on a debate like this a couple of nights ago was making that a main plank of his, and that is a balanced budget amendment.
Of course we can balance our budgets, Rob. It was not long ago.
We get there, considering how large
in the
the
last year in office of President Clinton, we were running $250 billion surpluses in this country. It's not written in stone that we have to run the federal government with deficit spending.
Would any of you support a balanced budget amendment?
Yes. I support a balanced budget amendment. I also support a line item veto.
One.
I'm a co-sponsor of it. I'm a co-sponsor of a bill to provide.
No, you haven't.
Have you sponsored a?
I'm a co-sponsor of a bill for
I'll tell you what
balanced
Mr.
budget
Dent
amendment.
has sponsored. In his 6-year term, he's sponsored about one bill every 2 months. The only bills that he've had enacted have been to change the names of post offices. You can go to Thomas and take a look at it. 2 bills changing the name of 2 post offices.
You're forgetting a lot of amendments that I have offered the bills. And by the way, this Congress, this is one of the problems with Congress right now, actually. Jake has raised an interesting point. You know, they don't
talk about Congress.
That's right.
Well, let Charlie Dent make his point.
Look, if we have to allow for votes on major issues, Speaker Pelosi, who supports him, will not allow votes on major pieces of legislation. I wanted to offer an amendment to the health care bill to strike the medical device tax. I took it into the Rules Committee, and a guy named Alcee Hastings from Florida, who's an impeached federal judge, rewarded with a seat in Congress, said, you know, we make up the rules here as we go along. We don't want to deal with your amendment. You know why? Because he knew it would pass. Same with my medical liability amendments. So I offer substantial amendments, and the Speaker Pelosi-led Congress will not allow us to vote on these. It's very undemocratic, very unfair. The voices of the American people are being shut out. And it's time that it stops, and we have to send a message. We need to fire the Speaker. I will vote against Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. He won't tell you how he will vote for the Speaker. He said in a debate,
I will vote for her.
He doesn't know how he's going to vote. Well, you have a choice. It's John Boehner or Nancy Pelosi.
And
That's
we know
it.
who you're going to vote for.
That's right. And I said it.
Well, he probably would vote for the Republican in this case.
Vote, and you know what that vote means? Let's talk about what that vote means. It means a vote to privatize Social Security. It's a vote to take Social Security dollars and gamble them on Wall Street. John Boehner's in favor of that. It's a vote to take Medicare
and you find something at last is where I would like to go, and that is Social Security. A memo circulated as a talking point, evidently, among some House members and Democrats says Republicans promise once again to privatize and cut your Social Security, turning it over to the whims of Wall Street. So you agree with the gist of that memo? And Charlie Dent, is that true?
Whose memo is this? I'm sorry.
It is a unidentified House Democrats memo that was recently circulated as a talking point
what a shock.
for the campaign.
Well, and that fact check has looked into this. I oppose privatization of Social Security. I have never supported it, despite John's misrepresentations. Frankly, they're outright lies. But nevertheless, I've never supported it.
I guess you're calling Morning Call a liar.
I didn't call anybody a liar. John, you're the one who's been dishonest.
That's what makes a forum like this kind of difficult, and why we start talking all over each other. He says, yes, that's an effort by the GOP to privatize, and you say it's not. So what do you mean? Take a shot at that, Charlie. What do you mean that you would like to see done with Social Security, and how is it different from privatizing it?
Well, first, what we're going to do, as I said, I oppose privatization of Social Security. What we want to do is make sure that Social Security is there for the next generation. Right now, those are over 55 are protected, but we're going to have a conversation in this country about how we make sure Social Security is going to be solvent. There is a deficit commission, entitlement commission that was established by the President. They're going to give us some recommendations in December. And they're going to look, and I suspect a lot of issues may be on the table, but we're going to have a discussion about this. Social Security needs to be fixed. Actually, Steny Hoyer, who came in town for John Callahan, he endorses.
But you said, well, he supported. When are you going to take some accountability for your votes? He supported as a member of Congress.
He supports raising the retirement age. He said that. Now you stand there proudly with him, and you try to make the charge against me over John Boehner. So you can't have it both ways, John. You just can't. So fundamentally,
I'd like to comment on the Social Security. Social Security is basically a Ponzi scheme. What Congress has been doing over the past few years is they just keep spending it. So if you're retired and living off of Social Security, your government has already spent the money. And what you're getting back, yeah, it's more dollars, but you're getting less purchasing power. And that's the whole problem. And the young people that are going out into the workforce right now, they realize what's going on. They realize that Social Security is not going to be around in 40 years. And what we need to do is we need to take a very solid look at phasing out the program, and the way to do it is at the...
Just get rid of it.
No. What I'm saying is over the next 40 years to slowly, gradually move out. And the way you do that, and the only way that it's politically possible to do it, and is to have a graduated phase out. So if you're age 50 and higher, you keep it at 100% because we need to keep those safety nets there, and you gradually move it down and down and down. And you make the program optional so that younger folks can get out, and if you do get out, then you lose the money that you put in. That's the solution.
Is that a good idea?
I have the article. It's March 17th, 2005 from the Morning Call, and it quotes Charlie Dent, and it says, Charlie Dent says that personal retirement accounts are not necessarily privatization. When we all know that everybody describes personal retirement accounts as privatization.
So you do not support personal retirement accounts?
And the Morning Call said, Rob, that he was playing word games with privatization. And I've got to tell you, I, as a member of Congress, will not play word games with people's Social Security. That is a trust, and that is a commitment that we have made to our seniors, and one that I intend to keep. And I will tell you, Charlie wanted to talk about endorsements. I've been endorsed by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. I have been endorsed, and they themselves have called Charlie out for playing word games with Social Security.
Is there any way to save the system without some sort of privatization, in the sense that some of the monies that are invested in a different way than they currently are? Otherwise, what happens to the whole system when in 2017 it starts to pay out more than it takes in? Some call it a Ponzi scheme.
You have to take in acts to the federal budget. You need to cut the military spending, because that's the largest section of federal spending where we can make a significant impact in saving Social Security and Medicare. And you also need to cut a lot of these other redundant federal departments that we have out there.
Charlie Dent,
the best way to shore up Social Security is to deal with our debt and deficit. And the $3 trillion of increased debt and the tripling of the deficit that Charlie Dent has supported has made it very hard for us to shore up Social Security.
Charlie Dent, how will you shore up Social Security is the question that everybody has. Everybody's worried about it. Jake Towne's right about that. It may not be there for me. So personal retirement accounts?
Social Security is a manageable problem. The big challenge that we're facing is on Medicare and Medicaid. I think everybody agrees that they're in fiscal trouble. This is the man who supported... This is the man who supported cutting... I can't answer your question.
Made it a voucher.
I never voted for the Ryan budget. No, but I want to make a comment here. He supported the health care law, which cuts $500 billion out of Medicare, not to save Medicare and preserve it for those who are on Medicare, but to create a new entitlement program. Are you denying that the health care bill did not cut $500 billion out of Medicare?
$500 billion from insurance companies, Charlie. That's what it cut.
Hospitals,
skilled nursing facilities. There's a reason why AARP supported
Medicare Advantage.
Not because it cut $500 billion.
They lost a lot of members because of it. They lost a lot of members because of it.
They are there to support.
As we bridge over kind of naturally into the health care bill, that is something that if the Republicans take over the House, they have pledged, in the Pledge for America, to revise it or repeal it. I guess repealing it, of course, is what they ultimately want to do. Congressman Dent, would you vote to repeal it?
We need to repeal and replace and reform, and we have to repeal major provisions of this law. The employer mandate that's going to drive up unemployment, which he supports, it has to go. The 1099 provision, he talks about his nonsensical 5-point job plan.
Make your point.
Every time,
Mr. Callahan, hang on a second.
Every time I answer, I get interrupted. The truth is, we have to repeal the 1099 provision. It's going to create a paperwork nightmare. Well, we have.
Voted against it.
John, you raised taxes.
Okay.
Rob,
stay on health care for a second here, and then make your point about what things you would say.
We have to repeal the employer mandate, the individual mandate. We have to get rid of the $500 billion in new taxes. And by the way, there are 20 or new higher taxes in the health care law that he supports. So we have to repeal those and replace them with reforms that make sense. Medical liability reform, allow cross-state purchases for insurance, also allow for small businesses to pool together so they can realize greater discounts, incentivizing both wellness and prevention. And do this, but the bill should not have been brought forward in a way with one big dirty deal. You should have dealt with this in sections, in pieces, digestible bites, so the American people would have confidence in the process.
I mean, if the Republican Party wins the House and even the Senate, the President would veto any such
Not as long as we have President Obama, obviously.
Right. So it would have to be 2012 or beyond, assuming then that a Republican wins the White House.
But in the short term, we can at least try to repeal some of these most onerous provisions that must go. The 1099 provision is a small business paperwork nightmare. $17 billion
against repealing it.
I voted against putting it in, and then some of your party. He's making a point. The point is, they offered a bill to eliminate it, but they did it by raising taxes on businesses.
No, they did not.
All the business organizations came out against it because what you do, John, you want to say we'll give you a little tax cut here, then we'll raise your taxes over there. That's what they do, and that's why all these business organizations, this administration, this Congress, led by Nancy Pelosi, is at war with the business community. They're going after the United States Chamber of Commerce for the second time, making false changes. They're going after the people who are trying to help us create jobs.
Okay. I need to give John Callahan, in fairness, to give a reply to that, and then Jake, you'll be next. Okay.
We all recognize that healthcare and healthcare reform is a central issue in this country. Okay. When Charlie Dent went to Congress 6 years ago, he said it was issue one, okay, that we needed to deal with. In those same 6 years, healthcare premiums have gone up by 34%. So while he was talking about the problem in Washington, D.C., I, as a mayor with 650 employees, was trying to figure out how to pay for it. Okay, it is high time because to sit back and listen to Charlie rail against Washington as if he hasn't been there for the last 6 years it's hard to take, Rob. All right. He had an opportunity to do something about it, and all he's done is talk about it. We all recognize that the healthcare system in this country and the cost in rising premiums was unsustainable. It was bad for business.
I will say this, meantime, although I've said that
premiums go up,
Towne is next.
Healthcare insurance companies' profits go up, and Charlie Dent collects the donations. $400,000
talk about his donations.
Hang on a second.
Of donations to his campaign. It's time we start fixing the problem.
Mayor Callahan, we did a story recently where young people were asked about the current political climate in this country and what they intend to do in the election and so forth. One of them, who considers himself a moderate, says a lot of people he knows were... I'm going to come back to you in a second. I just want to... This is about the health care bill, the law as it was passed. He says though he's a moderate, I know the health care bill is what threw me over the edge, meaning, as a lot of Americans apparently mean in the polls, which show that a majority wants to overturn the bill. I'm just putting that to you real quick, John Callahan, because you're in support of the health care law, but you are apparently not convincing the American public on that at this point. What do you say? And then, Jake, we'll come back to you, I promise.
Okay. Rob, I have supported healthcare reform and insurance reform, and because I recognize that the current system is unsustainable. 34% increases in premiums over the last 6 years, while Charlie Dent sat back and did nothing, is unsustainable. And so, it's a step in the right direction, and we need to continue to move forward and improve the bill going forward. But once again, it's another example of where Charlie Dent, who said it was issue one, when he became a member of Congress back in 2004, he sat back and did nothing.
I promise a comment from Jake Towne.
Thank you so much, Rob. Mr. Dent has said that he would repeal and replace the bill, and what I suggest for the listeners is take a close look at what the bill is that he's proposing to replace, and what you'll find is that that bill is just the Republican flavor of the Democrat bill. And the whole thing is that, written by the healthcare lobbyists, what this bill does is it does nothing to destroy, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, it does nothing to destroy the government-sponsored healthcare insurance cartel. It does nothing to create portability over state lines. It does nothing for tort reform. And I oppose the individual mandate that forces or fines individuals to enroll in the national plan, and also the harm for labor law interventions that will devastate the poor. Now, the other thing that I want to throw out as a challenge, the salary of a congressman is $174,000 a year. Over the past 6 years, we've paid Mr. Dent over $1 million. There's also the Congressional Health Care Plan and also the Congressional Pension Plan. I am the only candidate that has said I will only accept the median household income. I will be donating $116,000 of my salary to local nonprofit hospitals. I will not enlist in the Congressional Health Care Plan, and I will not enlist in the Congressional Pension Plan. And I'd like to hear Mr. Callahan and Mr. Dent talk about their, if they'll take a cut just like everybody else in the economy is, and if they'll pay for their own health care.
Well, there's a challenge, and I'll just let you know we're getting tight on time, so these may be some of our final remarks before the formal closing statements. You started on that, Mr. Dent. Go ahead.
Well, sure. Let's face it. The health care law that John supports will raise costs. There will be a massive consolidation of insurance companies. There will be fewer of them. I can assure you of that. There will be fewer of them. Because of the law that John supports, premiums are skyrocketing. They are skyrocketing now. We all know why.
It's the currency. It's the dollar.
Let me be very clear, though, that the costs are going up, not down. It bends the cost curve in the wrong direction. Everybody, I supported.
It's the dollar.
I supported
the rising.
Hold on, let Congressman Dent make his point here.
I supported substantial health care reform when I first got to Congress. Medical liability reform. Would you support limitations on contingency fees for trial lawyers? Would you support joint and several liability reform? Would you support any of that? Caps on non-economic damages? These are all things that are cost drivers. The law does not control costs. It provides more coverage, but there's no cost control. So costs will go up. The ability to meet the taxpayer to meet that rising cost will be limited. You'll have to move to denial of service and rationing. Government bureaucrats.
Our time is limited. Mr. Callahan, take a shot at that, please.
The system, okay? 34% increase in premiums over the last 6 years while Charlie Dent was in Congress. He did nothing to fix it. And instead, he collected $350,000 from the medical insurance companies. That's Charlie Dent's record.
Can I respond?
After saying it was issue one. He keeps talking about how costs are going to go up. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, nonpartisan, they are the folks that call balls and strikes on these bills and how much they're going to cost, has said that health care reform will lower the deficit. That's a fact. He's going to say it's not true.
We're up against our closing We're up against our closing statements. So if you want to just 10 seconds, Charlie Dent, on that.
Nobody in America believes that the health care law will lower the deficit. Nobody will. Deficits are going to skyrocket. Everybody understands they're revising their estimates.
Here we've done. I feel like we're just getting started.
6 years.
We have come to
10 years of revenue. 6 years of expenditure.
Hold on. You have a minute closing statement now. Each of you has a minute closing statement now. We determined by the drawing of straws at the beginning the order of these statements, and that means the independent candidate Jake Towne will go first, followed by Congressman Dent, and then Mayor Callahan. Jake Towne.
Thank you so much, Rob. This November 2nd, you can keep voting for those who have caused all this economic strife, or you can vote for a problem solver who not only has the solutions, but will listen and be accountable to you. I have more private sector experience than Mr. Dent, and I have more industrial experience working abroad than Mr. Callahan. I am the only candidate who has studied economics. I have a proven track record of results and success as a leader in serving customers. And what we need to ask ourselves as a question is, what have the people of the 15th District received by voting for the Republicrats? And the way my father once told me is what he said is, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. And what we have gotten is more debt, more war, more spending, fewer jobs, and less liberty and less prosperity for our society. Your parties have betrayed you. Your parties have lied to you. Your parties have let you down. This year you have a real chance in voting independent. I humbly ask for your vote this November 2nd. Thank you.
All right, Jake Towne, thank you. A final closing remark for a minute for Congressman Charlie Dent.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Channel 69, for having us here tonight. After being a father and a husband, serving you in the United States House of Representatives has been the greatest honor and responsibility of my life. I believe that America's best days are ahead of us, despite the economic challenges we're facing. America is an entrepreneurial country. People have a can-do attitude, and that spirit is what's going to sustain us. Many people, as we all know, are struggling. But at the same time, this spirit, if we send a message in Washington, we need a check and balance against this administration and against the Pelosi-led Congress, and I will be that check and that balance to stop the excesses, the excess spending that is just simply out of control. We can do better, and I respectfully ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 2nd.
Okay, and a closing statement from Mayor John Callahan.
Thank you, Rob, and I also appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be a part of this debate this evening. Folks, there's a clear choice in this race. A mayor with a proven record and a plan to help Main Street, or a congressman who's been helping Wall Street from Washington. While Charlie was in Washington, adding $3 trillion to the debt, I was in the Lehigh Valley cutting Bethlehem's debt by $60 million. While Charlie was in Washington bailing out Wall Street, I was in Bethlehem helping to create 5,000 jobs on Main Street. While Charlie was in Washington doling out millions in pork to Puerto Rican rum makers and campaign donors, I was cutting more than $10 million of government waste in Bethlehem. Congressman Dent may be a nice guy, but he can't run away from his record. He has fallen in with the wrong crowd in Washington. Now he's trying to distort my record because he can't defend his own. Billions of dollars in Wall Street bailouts, millions in debt, and a failed economy. The hardworking families of the Lehigh Valley are struggling. We need someone that understands how to create jobs and fix the financial mess. Someone who's going to bail out Wall Street and expect Main Street to pay for it. The Lehigh Valley needs a congressman that's going to represent the Lehigh Valley and not Wall Street.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you who have watched tonight. I'd like to express my thanks to the candidates for Congress and the 15th Congressional District for letting us hear their views on the issues, and hopefully the discussion has been helpful to you at home as you make your decision. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Vaughn. Good night.